Welcome, everyone. Happy Monday. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join me in the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? I invite Eric S. Erickson to join us for the invocation.
For those of you who are newer to Rotary, there are two Eric Ericksons. The other one is Eric E. Erickson. Oh, there he is. Good afternoon, Brother Erickson. Thank you, President Cindy, and if you would please join me. Lord, Creator and Savior, thank you for blessing us with the means and the time and the energy to meet today. Bless those here at the Holiday Inn who work hard every week to serve us, and thank you for their servant hearts and the hospitality they offer us. Lord, you love children, and as we approach the start of another school year, we ask that your hands be on teachers and administrators, caretakers, parents, and mentors who have the responsibility to care for kids and influence their future. Please protect our schools, protect our buses and everyone in them, and help us all to provide kids a safe and nurturing environment where they can learn and grow. Bless our conversations today. May it be to your glory and not ours. Amen.
I would certainly like to welcome all of our guests today and our greeters. If you are a guest, I would like to invite you to stand along with the person who invited you so that we may welcome you to Downtown Rotary today. On behalf of the club, I hope you enjoy your lunchtime with us and today's program. Down to Rotary business. Last week, I shared that we are moving into, gosh darn. Yes, okay, we've got it. There they were. Oh, saving the day over there. Thanks, guys. We are bringing back a number of committees that were on pause over the past year and a half or so, and wanted to give a shout out to all of our committee chairs who are sharing their time, their talents with bringing these committees back to life or helping veer them in our new chapter of the year and the areas that we're focusing on, along with some committees that we've not had before. If you have any interest in joining a committee or just being curious about what the committee's intent is, please feel free to stop me, reach out to Angie, or if you know any of those chairs, you can certainly reach out to them as well. We are in the heart of committee recruitment, and I think in the coming weeks and particularly coming months, you will get to see each of these committees in action and in motion. So again, a shout out, and I'm grateful to all the chairs. It's a blast to work with all of you right now. We also have a new member induction, and I guess you get to hear from me a little bit more because I am inducting a dear friend of mine. Stu, if you would come up while I read a little bit about you. Although not from the area, my dear friend Stu Weber has lived his entire professional career in Sioux Falls. For the last 15 years, he has worked at the Denny Sanford Premier Center in a variety of roles. Currently, Stu is the director of sales for the Convention Center, where he works on bringing events such as conventions, meetings, sporting events, etc. to town. I know this for a fact. Stu takes great pride in how all of these events create an economic impact on our community. Stu has business degrees from both the University of Minnesota and the University of Sioux Falls. He enjoys outdoor activities such as hiking, camping, and fishing. He's a Minnesota Wild and Vikings fan. He also plays soccer in Adult Soccer League. Please help me welcome our newest member, Stu Weber.
Thanks, Cindy. Really happy to be here today. My family has a history of Rotary involvement. My grandfather was a district governor in Michigan, And for many years, Rotary was a huge, huge part of both he and my grandmother's lives. And my grandfather is no longer with us, but I called my grandma up the other day to tell her that I was joining Rotary. And she's a World War II Army nurse vet, and she's 102 years old. She's amazing. She's absolutely amazing. And I told her I was joining Rotary, and she was like a kid on Christmas morning opening up presents. It was awesome. She was so happy. So any day you can make a 102-year-old person that happy is a good day, and that in itself made joining Rotary worth it. A few more words here. The vision of this club is to be the most influential and engaged service club in the community, comprised of leaders who want to create lasting impact in Sioux Falls. And I can tell you, having been aware of this organization for the entire time I've been in Sioux Falls, this club has a reputation for accomplishing all of its vision. Additionally, people know this is the club leaders want to join. So when I was asked to be a guest and then to apply, it was a no-brainer for me. And now that I'm being inducted, I truly look forward to sharing membership with so many great people and doing my part to help us continue accomplishing our vision. Thank you.
Well, once again, Stu, welcome. Glad to have you as part of the club. I am now going to invite our executive director, Angie Kuiper, up to walk us through some cool stuff.
Good morning, Rotarians. We've talked about before, every week we have our speakers sign the books that are given to Hawthorne Elementary. And we thought today was the perfect day, since we're talking about children, to share with you that we were given an award by Hawthorne Elementary. At the second to last day of school, I attended their school-wide assembly, as did Stephen Williamson and Joel Sylvester, and it was amazing. As you can imagine, all those little faces, and they were so happy and they're so full of life. It was a joy to be there. And they presented us with the Ubuntu Award, the first ever. And it says, "I am who I am because you are who you are." And the Ubuntu word Ubuntu is referring to the moral attribute of a person. So I thought that was very cool. It's something that they teach the children every day. It's worked into conversations. The kids all know what it means. And then it's part of their circle of courage conversation too. And they made a video to thank all of you for your gift. So I'll share that with you now.
Since 2019, the Rotary Club has shown Ubuntu and generosity to Hawthorne by supporting our classrooms with our Circle of Courage books for each quarter. This has put around 200 books into our classrooms. We want to take this opportunity to say thank you. You certainly do matter, Rotary Club, and thank you for showing us that we do too.
Oh my goodness, I had not seen that, and it is not easy to stand up here and keep it together, feeling all of that love. I also appreciated how every one of those classrooms had their own unique personality, just in their shout out to the group. And what a wonderful way to tee us up for our program, responding to Sioux Falls' childcare crisis. An incredibly important and right now topic that reinforces that downtown Rotary is a place where we strive to have important conversations. I'd like to welcome downtown Rotarian and Sioux Falls School District Superintendent, Dr. Jane Stavem, to lead our conversation regarding the childcare crisis facing Sioux Falls. She is joined on stage by Kerri Tietgen, CEO of EmBe, and Rebecca Wimmer, Coordinator of Community Partnerships and After-School Programs for the Sioux Falls School District. I'm grateful to have you all here. Dr. Stavem, take it away.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It is wonderful to see you on the first day of August. And I don't know about you, but I was a little dumbstruck, as I am at the beginning of every August, of how fast the summer goes. So hopefully you've made the most of it. We also appreciate your interest. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank all of you on behalf of our school district for what you do every day. So thank you. And it's wonderful that you get to see the kids we get to work with every day. Childcare means something different to many people. Depends on sometimes what stage of life you're experiencing right now. Depends on what that might look like in your workplace, your personal experiences through the years. Also changes sometimes geographically. You've lived in an urban area versus a rural area. So today we're going to talk about some of the different facets of childcare, what that means in our city. As you know, many people have shown a light on this over the last couple of years, and we've seen the needs grow. So with that, I was thinking about my questions and reflecting on about 31 years ago when I was a brand new parent. That dates me just a little bit. I did not have a child at the age of 5, but I'd like to think I'm not that old yet. But I had a choice to make as I was looking at providers. I was going to go back to teaching. I was a new teacher at the time. And when I was looking at what it was going to cost to have my child in daycare, I was faced with that choice of, is it really worth going back to work? Because just about all of my paycheck at that time was going to go into childcare. But if I didn't do it, I was going to go back half-time that year. If I didn't do it, I wouldn't have a slot for the following year when I was going to go back to work full-time. So when we think about all these years later, that's a choice that many families are still facing. And so talk about the trajectory of the cost factor of childcare, what that looks like maybe now as inflation is on the rise, and what does that look like over the last 10 years, and what are some of the drivers of those costs as they continue to go up?
Great question. So so there's a number of things that have happened, and to be honest, childcare has always been expensive, and I think we could all sit here and spend the rest of the day, those of you that have ever had children in childcare, and talk about, we could share war stories about how much it costs. My kids are not 31 years ago, but 15 years ago, it was insanely expensive. I think when my kids were in preschool, for the two of them, it was about $1,800 a month for my kids to go to preschool, and then I had to provide food and a number of things. What's happened since then is our numbers, until recently, really haven't changed that much in the community, the costs. And it's due to some outstanding leaders, such as Rebecca and others that came before me, that did all they could to try to keep costs affordable in this community. The number of things that have happened in the last few years, COVID, inflation rates, I checked this morning, June inflation rates are 9.1%. The cost to hire people is significant. We did studies, and in 2020, the average cost, the average wage for a childcare provider was $10.39. Now keep in mind, our students spend about 88%, up to 88% of their waking time with those providers. Now, I'd love to see a show of hands for those of you that can hire somebody at $10.39. And at that same rate is somebody that you want caring and raising your children. It's a challenge. And so the last few years have really spotlighted the cost of care and the significant increase in that, in how to make that affordable. And so we're at a point right now with childcare where we're in a crisis. And I don't use those words lightly, but we definitely are keeping rates affordable for families while covering our costs and expenses for childcare providers is at a crisis mode.
Rebecca, I want you to weigh in on that as well and talk about some of those specific drivers, the different components that have to be accounted for in that whole picture of care.
Absolutely. So when you think about what it takes to care for a child, we mentioned staffing, and that's a big part of it. But there's the other pieces as well, especially over the last 10 years or so. There's been a demand for higher quality care, which is excellent. I think everybody wants their children to have the best possible quality care. But like Kerri mentioned, that means that we need high quality staff. We want staff who have an educational background or experience in early childhood so that we ensure that our children are getting the content and the experiences they need to be successful. There's other pieces to that as well. There's technology costs, and a lot of those costs are increasing. Parents want that access to their kids. They want to be able to either see their kids on camera or get those updates on how they're doing in their curriculum. Curriculum is another area where there's a push for that nationally researched curriculum. Those are all good things, but that has increased the cost. And like Kerri said, the fees have not increased as much as they should have. And so we're seeing that crisis now where there's really a large gap between what it costs to provide care for a child and then the fees that families are paying. And it's to the point where childcare agencies just are not able to adapt anymore.
One of the things that I think can be confusing or that we just experience is a variety of terms when it comes to childcare. So we talk about daycare, preschool, childcare, after-school care, in-home childcare, private and public programs. So let's start with just the term daycare. What do we mean when we say daycare, and what are the current needs that we know about specifically the area of daycare?
Absolutely. So those words are all used interchangeably in the community, but they do have very distinct differences. And those of us that are in the childcare field understand those pieces of it. But for purposes of this, in terms of daycare, we're really looking at any care a child would need outside of the care of their primary caregiver, so which is generally your parents. In South Dakota, 84% of our children have all parents in the workforce. So whether that's a single mom who's working, taking care of kids, whether that's a two-parent family, maybe it's an aunt or an uncle or a grandpa or grandma who are providing primary care. But for our kids, 84% of South Dakota children have all parents in the workforce. And so that means that roughly 8 out of every 10 children will need some type of alternative care during those days when parents are working. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about the daycare need. In South Dakota, Sioux Falls specifically, and really across the country, the need for childcare far outpaces the availability. And that's different for different communities. For Sioux Falls specifically, when we talk about not having the available childcare for the children who need it, we're not necessarily talking about buildings. There was a study that Augustana Research did a couple of years ago that really looked at what do we have for available childcare slots. So when you look at all of the centers and all of the in-home providers that have childcare, and you look at the number of slots available, we have enough slots to take care of all the children in Sioux Falls that need childcare. What we have is a workforce issue. We're functioning on a state licensing child to staff ratio, and we can't find the workforce to fill those slots. And so there are buildings, there's in-home providers that are not full because they're simply not able to find the workers to be able to meet the need. And so that's a very distinct difference between Sioux Falls and what you may see in rural areas of South Dakota where they don't even have the physical slots. And so that's an important piece to remember when we talk about what the needs of our community are. It's not necessarily more daycare buildings. We have a workforce issue that we need to overcome.
And slots, we mean a place based on an adult to child ratio that's required, not just preferred. And what's a typical ratio? Kerri, what's a ratio for your classrooms in your organization?
So for ages 0 to 2, you can have 5 children to 1 teacher. And then the older from 3 to 5 is a 10 to 1 ratio. Now you're also limited by, so that's that's assuming that the space allows that as well. So physical space also determines how much space you can have and how many children you can have. And so there's a number of factors that exist. So some will say, well, we've got space, why don't you expand in our space? Well, that's great, but there's a lot of factors that require eligibility for that. So it's a lot more complex than just space.
And specialized space. I know as a school district administrator, when we've looked at using existing buildings or expanding maybe into a workplace, there are many requirements that go along with the space for particularly little children. What would be one example of a requirement that you would have to have in place for a preschool or infant and toddler age space?
Number of bathrooms and sinks per child. So there's a requirement that you have a certain number of bathrooms and sinks for every child in there. So you might have a lot of space, but if that doesn't come with a lot of toilets and sinks, you can't use that space for kids.
So we know that regulations, I've looked at the regulation book and it's very thick, and so it's a complex industry. Sometimes I think people have the perception that it's babysitting or just, open a place and we love kids and so we're willing to do this, but a lot more goes into it. There's also a lot that goes into funding. And so we know there are different ways that it might be funded. One is parent pay or a guardian paying for that service. There's also philanthropic gifts that might be part of the picture, state and federal funding. When you think about the ideal picture for funding after school daycare, childcare, what do you think are some of the best ways that we should be thinking about funding programs?
I think if we had that answer to that question, we probably wouldn't be up here today because there are multiple ways that things are funded. One of the challenges, so when you look at the cost of providing care to a child, like we've talked about before, there's that imbalance. And so child care centers specifically are really struggling with the fees that parents pay aren't enough for the cost of what it means to do business. And so they are seeking out other philanthropic avenues, whether that's writing grants, whether that's going to donors and asking for funding, seeking funding sources from agencies such as United Way to help bridge that gap. So there's maybe not a one-size-fits-all answer. When we look at affordability, the government has said that affordability for childcare should be 7% of a family's income. There's some families in our community where that's absolutely affordable for them. And so they're able to look at that and they're able to make those payments regularly, and it's really not so much of a challenge for them. It's still an expensive program, but it fits within their budget. Then we have other programs in our community that families that have very low income can receive subsidies, and so most of the time they are able to get some of that child care paid for. But where we come to a struggle is those families that really fall into what we call the gap, and they make too much for to be able to afford child care, but not enough that they can receive subsidies. An example would be if you're a family with two parents and two children under the age of 5, and you're making a combined total of $60,000 a year, you won't qualify for child care assistance in most circumstances. But you will pay about $17,000 in child care costs for your two children. So that's nearly 30% of your income that is going to child care. And if the government says that affordability is at 7%, that's a really significant gap for those families. And that's where we see the biggest issue. And unfortunately, where we're seeing the workforce issue is those are the families that are deciding to leave the workforce and stay home with their children. In and of itself, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that every family has to decide what is best for them. But as a state, when we look at what that may look like, if we have to kind of move to that where a parent has to stay home because of the inaffordability of childcare, if we've got 84% of our children who have all parents in the workforce, and that inaffordability affects those families, we could potentially have about 50,000 people that would have to leave the workforce in South Dakota in order to stay home and care for children. In Sioux Falls, that's roughly 11,000 individuals. And so when we think about workforce already, and you hear everybody talk about the struggles of workforce, to think about the potential of 11,000 individuals just in the Sioux Falls area leaving the workforce. It's a scary thing to think about, and those are the things that we have to come together to solve, is how are we going to bridge that gap if that's the direction we're going.
And can I add one thing? One of the misconceptions is that child care centers are being propped up federally and by the state, and they're not. And so there are dollars that go directly to the families. But right now, our costs are covered through tuition or philanthropic donors. And for us at EmBe, we make sure that financial barriers are not something that exists for families. So if a family is not able to provide or afford our care, we provide scholarships. This year, we are on pace to provide about $450,000 in scholarships to families that can't afford the care. As prices go up and as we adjust and need to make sure that we're paying our people competitively to come and work for us, that changes. That scholarship need is going to be more, and that comes directly from either tuition from the families or the generosity of our community supporting through donors.
It's a delicate balance of so many different variables that I think go into this. And so I was talking with a person in our office who just recently had a new baby, and the quest to find infant care was a long and arduous process. And if you talk with young parents, many are experiencing that. And part of it is at the point you're going to need that care, you better be starting about a year in advance of looking. I see heads nodding. And it's to try and find care then that is going to be sustainable through different age groups. A few friends have had somebody who will take infants, but they won't take toddlers, or they'll only do it for a period of time. If we really start thinking about, first of all, why are we maybe experiencing fewer providers? Why has that reached a point where there isn't just simply enough to go around? And then when we really think about what do we do as a city for some of those solutions, what do you think we should be considering as a city?
So let's talk about this. So, and I look at this from a business perspective. I don't come with a childcare background, and so this is the only way that I know how to look at it. And at $10,000 a year, which was the average cost of care in 2020, today I'll say it's probably for infant care more around $11,000 or $12,000 for care in Sioux Falls. So say we moved it and it's 12. Well, at $10,000 a year of care, the average revenue, the rate of revenue that we receive per hour per child is just over $3. And remember those ratios that we talked about before is 5 children to 1 teacher. So we have around $16 per hour in revenue to support the income of the teacher, that person's benefits, the facilities, the insurance, the supplies, the materials, the food, all of those things. And so it's the financial, the business sense of this is it doesn't make sense for somebody to be able to provide infant care. There's no way that you can do that and make money on it or barely cover costs. So that's one of the things that addresses that issue. It's
Which
difficult.
I think is important to note, just as a business proposition, there needs to be some considerations to just make that more appealing to somebody who wants to provide both a service and needs their own income.
Yeah. And the other thing when we talk about workforce, and I've talked to several of you in this room that have talked about the workforce challenge, and not to one up, we're not in a competition, but let me tell you, so if we don't come to work, if our teachers don't come to work, nobody can go to work. So there is a difference with childcare. Also know that all workers aren't necessarily the right worker, and so you think about the kind of person and the kind of skill set and the kind of unique skills that somebody provides to be able to care for infants to 5 years old. They're a special person. I couldn't do it. I'll be honest. It's not in my skill set to do. I don't have that kind of grace and love and that special, unique piece. So the workforce is tight, and then you find somebody that has that skill set, and then you find somebody that has the ability to work for what we're able to pay. It's a really, really small niche market that's able to do that. That makes it difficult.
Absolutely. I would agree. It's challenging. It's difficult work. Like Kerri mentioned, not everybody can do that. You're talking about the development of children from that age of 0 to 5. That brain development is significant, and when we talk about having someone who understands brain development, someone who's trained and educated, that's a significant piece. At no other time in a child's life will their brain develop as quickly as it does from birth to 5 years of age. And so having individuals who understand that brain development are going to give our kids the experiences they need to be successful. It's very important that we're allowing our children to be in the environment where they can thrive.
When we think about solutions, one of the things that we often hear brought up is if the workplace would just open a facility right on site that would take care of the problems, at least for your own workforce, and might be a way to entice people to come and work for your organization. What do you think are some of the pros of that approach, and what might be some of the cons of that?
From a pros perspective, who would not want to have their children located right next to their workplace, easy drop off and pick up? You have a little more control over where your kids are and what they're doing. You can check on them regularly. So there are certainly a lot of pros for employers too. Knowing that they have a reliable place for their employees to bring their children is very important. But as we've seen over the last number of years, there have been some employers in Sioux Falls who have done that and have chosen to get out of that business because childcare is a difficult business. It's not easy to manage. Like I mentioned before, where we're at in Sioux Falls is not a physical space issue. And so I think employers certainly can take a look at providing that for their employees, and I think they'll get employees that are very interested in that. But you're passing the burden from those nonprofit agencies to the employer then to figure out that gap, because that gap is still going to exist. And so what employers need to think about then is, are they willing to help subsidize that gap? Because that's really what it's going to take in order for employees to be able to go to work. It's not that they need a physical space next to their place of employment. It's they need help covering that gap. And if there's not the funding to cover that gap somehow, it doesn't matter how many buildings you put up, it's still not going to reach as far as it needs to for financial purposes.
I'll tell you, most business books would tell you stay out of it. If you're not an expert in that area already, stay out of it. Same with childcare. It's a difficult business. It's a specialty business. There's a lot of expertise that goes into that. And so the heart of trying to solve this for staff is the right direction. How we're going about it maybe isn't. So I've had a number of employers that said, we identified that this is a problem and that we need to do something. We looked into starting our own center, and didn't take us long to realize that's absolutely not where we want to be, and we don't know how to do that. So what they did is come to us and said, what is the ways in which we can partner with you? Taking the expertise of centers like EmBe and Boys and Girls Club and others that are doing a really nice job of it, lifting up the expertise and saying, where can we support you as an organization, and how can we fill this gap with our employees is really the right thing to do. Taking the skills and services that you have as an employer, taking the expertise that we have as providers, and coming up with some unique solutions and innovative solutions for our community is the direction.
So we touched on kind of the beginning daycare needs, maybe with infants and toddlers and things that those first parents are needing. There's also school age care though. And often we think about that in terms of elementary age students that maybe aren't able to stay at home or shouldn't be at home alone yet. But it also extends up into middle and high school for many different reasons. Rebecca, talk about the options for school age children right now at the elementary level who need a place to be after school until maybe a parent or guardian is available.
Sure. So in the Sioux Falls community, we have a number of different providers who provide after-school care. Some of those range from full parent pay to those that are scholarshiped, places that provide care at no cost to families. But one of the challenges we have is that there's an accessibility issue for a lot of kids. What we know from years of research is that high-quality after-school programs provide opportunities for children that they maybe don't get elsewhere. Kids that are involved in high-quality after-school programs tend to have better academics. They have better social and emotional skills. They have better physical health because they're being taught things in those environments. Some of the other benefits that you see from kids, particularly those that are coming from maybe a lower socioeconomic background, is you see higher graduation rates, lower incidences of crime. So we know that after-school programs are a critical component. The problem is the access. Lots of times, again, those families that are maybe more affluent are able to put their children in high-quality after-school programs because they can afford those. Whereas children that are coming from maybe a lower socioeconomic background can't afford those same things. And so what we get is the opportunity gap, where those kids that are able to afford that are gaining the skills and the opportunities. They're being exposed to so many different things that we know after school provides. And those that can't afford it are falling further and further behind. So over the last couple of years, we've been working as a community to collaborate, to bring together organizations and say, you know, how can we do things differently in Sioux Falls? We know we have organizations like EmBe, Volunteers of America, Boys and Girls Club, Lutheran Social Services, Multicultural Center. We have so many organizations, but a lot of those are siloed. And so we've come together as a collaborative and are focusing on how do we together provide opportunities? How do we make sure that this high quality care is accessible to all children? And that's something that over the next months and years, you'll see a lot more of, is those agencies coming together and saying, we're going to provide this as a community to all of our kids so that every child has the same opportunity for success.
Whether at elementary, middle, or high school, but why would a middle or high school student need to be somewhere?
Those same factors are true for middle and high school age children. The more that those kids are involved in extracurricular activities outside of their school day, the more successful they are, even to the point where there's research that shows that adults have higher income earnings if they've been involved in high quality programs. They're more likely to engage in their community, be involved in programs such as Rotary, where they're engaging in different ways in their community. If we know that that's what develops healthy adults, and we want a healthy community, we have to provide those same things, not just in elementary school when they need that physical supervision, but also in those middle and high school. The other thing that comes into play is that you know, we've got lots of families who are working very hard, and they may not have the same amount of time to help their children develop the skills that maybe you would have 30, 40 years ago. And so life is very different now. And as a community, that means that different providers have to fill in some of those pieces and help develop those kids. And after school programming is an exceptional way to be able to provide those kids those opportunities.
I want to touch on just for a moment the effect of the pandemic. I think we all hope that we are moving gradually further and further away from kind of the most intensive part of the pandemic, but how would you characterize what I call dents and ripples from the pandemic? How would you characterize some of the biggest dents and ripples that you've seen that have affected the childcare industry?
So how long do we have for this answer? We've got a number of things, and I'm sure, again, everyone could share quite a few things. For the childcare world, know that the costs per child increases when we're not able to have our centers full. So coming back to the crisis and what we're existing from or coming out of, when we can't staff fully, the cost per child to provide care has increased significantly. And we've got a number of childcare providers that are recovering from that. You all, as those of you that are parents with young ones today, or those of you that have know of people with children today, you understand the stress of a parent and what we're carrying mentally, emotionally. The work has been significant. Our parents are fatigued. And the number of times that I'm getting messages from parents talking about how much more difficult it is to be a parent today versus before is significant. Our children have undergone some pretty intense experiences over the last few years as well, and resettling and figuring out what that, recalibrating to that is really important. I believe being part of community, having friendships and being part of healthy programs is really key to that and really important. And so the need for after school care, child care, and support systems for families has increased significantly as a result of COVID.
Just simple disconnection from other families is,
absolutely
I think, bigger than we maybe tend to estimate. Rebecca?
very similarly, I think about the development of our children. And if you think about we're, 2.5, 3 years into really this pandemic and looking at what that's done for our children and being in that role during the height of that pandemic, if we know that children's brains develop faster from 0 to 5 years at any other point in their life, think about the skills that they're learning, especially our little infants and toddlers. Everything they learn is imitated from what they see from the world around them. And for 2 years, those children saw very little of facial features. They just saw eyes because everybody is masked. And so you think about speech development, you think about emotional development. When a baby smiles at someone, it's generally because someone is smiling back at them. For 2 years, our children didn't see that. And so imagine what it's like growing up in that type of environment. We're seeing things with kids that we haven't seen before, whether that's emotional behavioral issues that we're seeing at younger ages, issues with speech development, things like that, that are a result of that pandemic that we haven't even begun to prepare for. And so as these kids age and we deal with some of that, we're going to need to be prepared to provide them the supports necessary so that they can be successful.
And the good thing is, through the last 2 years, we learned that technology can be wonderful. The challenge is we've taught our children on over-reliance on technology, and human connection is really important. And as we look at EmBe, especially our middle school and high school youth, we're realizing how just that it's not a nice to have, it's a must have, a space for kids to connect. We've done a wonderful job in our community providing opportunities for kids to gather around sports. I know I'm a soccer mom, I participate in that, and I'm sure all my effort is going to pay off in some. I'm sure Sioux Falls will be the mecca for developing professional athletes for as much energy and time and money we put in. But I also think there's a whole other, there's a lot of other needs for our students that the pressures for parents aren't able to, even those that are affluent and able to provide, financially afford it, aren't able to provide it. And so there's a number of opportunities that we're just missing with our students, that middle school youth, the after school care is just so much more important, I think, than it's always been important. Now I think it's just that much more.
I want to touch on the political aspect of childcare, some of the perceptions that exist. I think we probably agree that parents are the first and best care provider for their children. Sometimes there are situational things that might arise that require a parent to go into the workforce. It might be a choice because of career aspirations or any hundreds of reasons why. How do we balance the need to support parents who both want to stay home as well as those who want to be in the workforce or need to be in the workforce? And what would need to happen maybe legislatively or even at a state and or national level that might help provide more supports for childcare in Sioux Falls?
First of all, I want to make sure it's understood that, there's respect for the decisions that every family has to make, whether that means staying home with their child or putting their child with in-home provider, whether it means grandpa or grandma or aunt or uncle, or putting them in center-based care. Whatever decision that family has to make, understanding that they did not make that decision lightly. And it's often personally difficult for families to have to choose between, putting their child in some form of care or staying home. And so we want to always respect that decision and that decision process. When it comes to, meeting that need or figuring out, how do we best support families? I know that there are some people that would say, if we're providing families these support, aren't we just enabling them? Aren't we giving them, the excuse to not have to work hard? And for me, when it comes to dealing with children, if we want children to succeed, we have to emulate those things that look like success. And that means we have to provide those environments where children can succeed. And if a parent is working, making sure that that child is in the right environment so that they can see success, they can have the opportunities, is extremely important. But that means that there's a cost that goes along with that. And so as a community, coming together and figuring out what does that look like. I'm not one that thinks that the government should just cover all of the costs for it. I think that it's a multifaceted approach, but it's an approach that needs everybody's voice. Childcare is not going to be able to fix it on our own. We've done that for a lot of years where we've maybe extended this a lot longer than we should have because we're just trying to make sure families have what they need, but we're out of solutions at this point. And so we really need the voice of everyone to come together and say, you know, what is it going to take if we want to make sure that we raise strong families, we raise strong individuals, we've got to come together as a community.
I liken it to the game Red Rover. Anybody remember Red Rover? You know, the goal was to join hands and not let anybody get through. How do we do that? No matter how many hands or the types of hands that have to join together. We don't want any child to fall through and not allow them to have the choices that they want as an adult in our community. If you had one wish for our city, and that wish would result in more families having the options that they need readily available to them for affordable childcare, what would that one wish be? Kerri, I'm going to start with you.
All right. Well, so I'm going to do it in a 3-part because that's how I think.
Sounds like
So,
3 wishes
I know,
to me.
3 wishes, 3 wishes. You know, and just to take a step back, I'm a better mom because I get to work. And so I understand that. And my kids are better served because I get to go to work. And so I've been fortunate to have a number of people along the side, whether it's a childcare provider, whether it's a friend, whether it's church, whatever, that supported our family. And I understand how fortunate I am for that. We need to think about, and my dream is that childcare is not a political issue. It is not just something for young families to consider, but that we understand that in order for our workforce and for this engine of our community to grow, we've got to support and pay attention to childcare, because childcare is an issue for everyone. And again, we all can't go to work unless somebody's coming to work for us. And so that matters. So one is for our community to invest in childcare like they do the infrastructure of the city, like they do knowing that we need roads that can get us from point A to point B, and that we need utilities that allow things to happen. We also invest and understand that childcare has to be part of that equation, just like the schools and everything else for our economy to function. 2, we as employers that have the ability to support, we need to figure out and support these families and allow them to go to work. So, you know, I find very few businesses that don't offer some sort of health insurance assistance for their employees to make health insurance affordable. We're at a point where families need and are requiring you as employers to make childcare affordable as well and offer us at a benefit. The third piece and the third big wish is to lift up and really honor and value the work of these childcare providers. We've got to remember, during the pandemic, when the whole world shut down, we had people in this community showing up every day for $10.39. They had no idea what the pandemic meant for them. They had no idea what it meant for our community. They didn't go for the fame and the glory and the high pay. They showed up because they loved your children. They loved your children, and they knew how important it was for you to be able to go to work and have quality care. And we've got to lift up these people and understand that they are not just babysitters, but they are important teachers involved in the development of your children and in developing the future of this community. And we've got to value those individuals. So I can't say enough. If we can value that workforce and honor those people that are going into that and really lifting them up, those 3 things are my
And I would
dream.
add cultivating that
Yes,
workforce, which
cultivating
is another
that
issue
workforce.
we probably won't have even a lot of time to talk about.
Next time.
Rebecca, what's your one wish that may turn into 3?
I don't know that I probably could have said that any better than Kerri did. The only thing that I would add, and something that for me I've been very passionate about, is working together as a community, making sure that as agencies, as businesses, as community leaders, we're coming together and working on solutions. We're a whole lot more effective and efficient when we're working together.
These are Rotarians. Rotarians like to help. What's one quick way, last comment, that any Rotarian in this room can help childcare in our community?
What do we want to ask for?
Funding.
I would say for me, get involved, whether that means that you're part of the conversation and you're sitting around the table and helping be innovative and come up with new solutions. If you're someone who likes to think crazy out of the box things, please come and sit around the table with us and help us figure out what this solution looks like for our community. Whether that's volunteering, come and experience what it's like to work in childcare. Spend time rocking a baby or playing on the playground with a 3-year-old, or sitting and tutoring an elementary student who's maybe just struggling. Become a mentor. You guys have the Sioux 52 program. I cannot say enough about the impact that mentors have on our children. Be involved that way. And if you have the financial ability and the heart to give, then give. Help cover the gap for some of those families that are working hard but just can't make ends meet. Be there, stand in the gap, and support them as they're working to do the best they can for their family. Thank you to you both for what you do in support of our families and how that impacts our community every day. And please extend our greatest appreciation to the folks that work with you as well. Thank you for your attention today, and hopefully this helps you support the people that you work with and the families around you as well.
Dr. Stavem, what would be your wish?
Oh boy. I think my wish is that people would take time to understand the real crisis that exists. Sometimes we get a little bit farther removed when our children are adults or older and when we no longer have the same need, but pay attention to the needs around you and ask, what does that look like in your individual situation, so that you really understand what the need looks like.
While the task at hand is daunting, I don't think we have better experts at the helm, and I want to extend my appreciation for the work that you do and for enlightening all of us today. And with that, Rotary is adjourned.